Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of Magic and Miracles with your host, Jennifer Schlüter. And today I am here with Louise Kirk. And Louise, what is your magic and miracles moment in life, or what led up to it? Because I know the backstory, but our listeners don't. So, what led up to it? There's a lot that was happening before. So, please walk us through that.
Absolutely. So, my miracle moment, I mean, gosh, there's been so many, but today I wanted to share with you one that happened to me. I'm not going to give away my age, but a fair few years ago. I was 18, and my dream had always been to volunteer in Africa. And so, when I was actually 17, I went out to volunteer, work in schools, orphanage, all the good stuff that you do. And along my journey, I made some incredible friends, and in hindsight, some not so incredible friends. And what eventuated from my time there, after really getting to know a group of people for probably about the course of a year. So really trusted them. We'd met their family. They were, just came across as really awesome people. Me and this other volunteer, should I say, when I say we, had decided that we were going to venture to the UK, where we're originally from, and our very kind friends offered to lend us their suitcases because our backpacks were just so torn at that point. And we were traveling via Amsterdam. That was the way we were flying. What we didn't realize was that they'd actually hidden cocaine in those suitcases. And so when we got to Amsterdam, we were stopped and obviously searched because they do the searches. And I just remember being so surprised. In fact, I remember them pulling me aside and they said, "We're going to search your bag for drugs." And I was like, this is going to be the most hilarious story to tell everyone when I get home. All the jokes we were going to make about being a drug trafficker, but they tested positive, and hidden in the lining of those suitcases was cocaine. And so I was very quickly taken to a female prison where we had to wait a few months before we could stand trial. And the entire time, I just kept thinking, I'm going to walk free. Like, yeah, I'm here for a few months, but I'm going to walk free because I know I didn't know. I was completely clueless, naive, but clueless. I honestly thought, the world is fair, the justice system is just. We didn't know what we were doing, and so we would walk free. All the way up until the trial, where they ruled that they believed we didn't know, but that we should have known. And to prevent anyone else also using the same excuse and setting a precedent. So in terms of trafficking drugs, we were given a short sentence of 6 months in total. But for me, it felt like this is the end of my life. I thought, gosh, like, who is going to employ me after this? I'd had all these big dreams. I was going to go to university. I was going to continue my work out in Africa. Who was going to date someone like me now that I was this criminal, this drug trafficker? How was I going to face my family again? How was I going to go back out into the world and face my friends who were back home, who were a bit clueless at that point? They thought I was still in Africa after what had happened. Even though I knew I was innocent, having that ruling and having that justice system say you're still guilty made me feel like I was the criminal, and that was it. And I remember the first time being given that and then being led back to my cell. And I was just crying, as you'd expect, crying and crying in the shower, thinking that it was all over. But then I had this weird sense, and I couldn't describe it at the time because I wasn't spiritual, I wasn't religious, but just almost this voice that said, "You're exactly where you're supposed to be." And for me at that time, it was so confusing because I was like, this is not where I'm supposed to be. I'm supposed to be going on my way to university. I'm supposed to be going and hanging out with my friends. I'm not supposed to be here amongst other women who would commit murder or who were drug traffickers or who had done things. But it also gave me this strange sense of calm, like it's going to be all right. And that this isn't going to be a sentence that will last for a lifetime. And so, a remainder of the sentence, obviously, I had to sit out in prison. But when I got out, I'd made that decision that it wasn't going to be the end of my life and that perhaps was supposed to be there. And so I made that commitment to myself that I was going to change that story, that I wasn't going to go down this dark route that I thought that I was going to end up going down. And I did go to university and I did do my master's. And then I interned at the United Nations and I traveled the world and now leading up to the business that I have. And so although it was a very dark place at that time, it was really that almost that sense of a miracle of that strange voice or feeling that it was going to be okay that allowed me to choose a different path.
Wow, that is absolutely incredible. So, was there any other moments where that voice came through, like during your time in prison, like that miracle voice, I'm going to call it for now? Was there any other times when it came through? Because, like, 6 months is quite a long time. And then at the end of those 6 months, to make the decision, this is not my life, this is not what it's going to be like, how was that for you?
I think after that moment, it kind of just settled as a feeling of you've only got so many more months left. Like it'd already taken 3 months just to get to trial. So it was kind of this sense of you're halfway through, you just have to get through and you will be leaving. And when you leave, there is more for you out there. It was almost this sense of also stripping away of an identity that I'd created. I'd created this identity of being this good girl, of being the one who does the right thing, who studies hard, who makes the right decisions. And it was almost as if that was taken away in that instance and kind of stripped bare. It's like, well, you're no longer the good girl, even though it was not something I'd intended to do. But it also gave this sense of freedom of like, well, what do you want to create now? Who do you want to be now? And I think because of that incident, it almost was like a reset button. It was like now you get to choose. Now you're free to go do whatever it is that you want to do because you're no longer holding yourself to these expectations.
And do you think there was anything in your childhood that led up to this moment where you were actually able to believe that? Or was there absolutely nothing you would say because something else happened in your childhood?
I wouldn't say there was anything looking back in my childhood. Like we weren't religious, we're not spiritual people as a family, although I'd say I'm a bit more spiritual now. Um, that would have made me have that moment where it almost felt like, I don't know if it was the universe or God or just, my subconscious mind going, no, we're not giving up. Um, just in that moment was the first experience I'd had of some kind of something that felt like it was outside of myself.
Hmm. Wow. And were there other people in prison that you met that were sharing the same mindset, or was it most of the people would not believe that?
I'm not sure, but I think for me, being where I was changed my perception a lot. Growing up, it was always this sense of if you're a criminal, you're a bad person. If you did something, you knew what you were doing. There was very this like black and white that we have in society. There was no seeing someone as a person. And when I went in there, and I still remember this one woman, and she was like the sweetest woman you could have met, and she was there for life. And she essentially had been with a very, very abusive partner for a very long time. And one day she just had had enough. And she picked up a hammer nearby and she hit him across the head. And he basically was a permanent vegetable. So although he didn't die, he has no quality of life. And when I got to know her, my heart kind of broke for her because if someone had been able to step in right before, it was like although she'd committed this crime, she was also a victim. And I just hoped that, someone had been able to go in there and save her first, or that she'd been able to leave the relationship. And it should have been him in prison for all of the things that he had done to her and not the other way round. And so I got to really get to know women where you really got to know their story around their survival of actually they don't have the same opportunities as everybody else. Some of the women who were there from other parts of the world who, they were trafficking drugs because they were trying to feed their kids and they didn't have any other financial and economic opportunities. There was women that came in around Christmas time who they would purposefully steal around Christmas time because otherwise they'd freeze on the streets. So they would purposefully get themselves in those situations, also knowing they'd have shorter sentences because it wouldn't be a major crime, just so that they had some food and somewhere to stay. And so you kind of really got a different perception of why people do what they do, and that it isn't just this black and white, that everyone's out to do something horrific or they're a bad person, or that they even had a real choice or that that was the worst choice that was available to them. Because for some people, it was, I can prostitute myself or I can sell drugs. And if it was me, I'd probably be selling the drugs, right? It's,
Hmm.
the choices that they had to make. And so I don't know if they shared the same perception, but I definitely shifted the way I saw women from that moment forwards.
And this newfound sense of compassion, I would say, or describe it as, or this newfound sense of thinking, how did that shape you for until now? How did that
In
shape your life,
so,
your
yeah,
decisions?
in so many ways. So I stuck along the route of still wanting to support women. It was something I was still passionate about. So when I went to do my master's, I went back to Africa and worked with disabled women and children. And again, like you just saw them as a human person, not this Oxfam, ad that you see. You really got to understand women at a deeper level and what they go through. And even now in the work that I do with a lot of women, where I support them to let go of a lot of self-doubt and build their confidence, I think it just allows me to create this space for women where they come and say, oh, I've never told anyone that before, because I'm allowed to kind of, it's not so judgmental as I probably would have been, having firstly had experiences I've had to overcome myself, but also being able to be with women who society would say are, bad or shameful or, wrong, but to be able to hold women in those experiences because so many women hold a lot of shame for things that either wasn't their fault but they still hold shame, like I did for a long time, but also shame for things that they did do in the past. And so it's really helped me to guide women in releasing a lot of that.
And having been through this at the age of 18, which is super young to have been through something like this, right? And then experiencing the miracle mindset shift that you had, how did this shape you in expecting miracles and asking maybe for miracles or something from, whatever you believe in, God, universe? How did that shape you?
After that, once I went to university, I definitely started exploring religion and I explored different religions. I never found one that quite matched my values, but I always was so curious about this relationship that people had with God or the universe because up until that point, to me, it was all like, I just didn't believe it because I'd never sensed it. I'd never felt it. And so I thought people were just like, you're all brainwashed cuckoo people, or you're all a bit like hippies. And so I definitely feel like it shifted my perspective and then going into leaning into like personal development and things like that, of realizing that sometimes the bad things that happen in life happen for a reason. They don't feel that way at the time. At the time, they suck. But the reality is, whether you believe they're supposed to or not, it's a choice to believe. And it was my choice to believe in that story that it was supposed to happen that allowed me to continue on, as opposed to choosing a story that I was just a victim and that my life was over. And so, really, it was about that power of owning and choosing your own story and deciding what you believe.
Yes, absolutely. And what other magic and miracles have you created since then? Maybe you can tell us another story, share another story.
Wow. There's just so many. I mean, I'm a mother of two young girls, and they themselves sometimes, it's a miracle in motherhood that you survive. This is what I always say. Another one of my moments, I suppose, was really, again, one of those challenging moments in your life. And this was really the start of my deeper personal development journey and really looking at who I was as a person. And so, although I'd gone through all of this stuff from the age of 18, built my life, motherhood really knocks it out of you. And I think so many other mothers would relate. You never know what you're going to get until it happens. You can think about, yeah, I can handle the sleep deprivation and I'll be this kind of parent or this parent. And you just don't know until you're there. And then you're like, why did no one tell me? But the truth is, everyone experienced it differently. But for me, the birth of my first child, so this was nearly 8 years ago now. And she came along and she came along quite well. She was all healthy, but I really struggled. I really struggled and fell very quickly into depression, which I'd never had before in my life. Despite having been in prison and other things, I'd never actually struggled with any form of depression. And so for me, this was a real challenge because I prided myself in doing things really well. Again, I'd adapted that to my identity. I was like, I show up and I get good grades and I get told I do well at work. And all of a sudden, I was a mother and no one says, well done, good job. And there's no measure to say, yes, I've done everything I knew to do today and I did it well. And so I was ticking all the boxes. I'd be out with my baby in my backpack, doing looking after myself. We're doing bushwalks. We'd be going to all the mums and bubs groups. I'd be making healthy meals. I'd be cleaning the house. I was like, I'm going to be the best mother ever. But I was so miserable and I couldn't quite understand why because I had an amazing husband. My kid didn't sleep, but that was standard. But on the outside, it looked like I was just doing so well. And I kept trying to keep up this performance of doing really well. But in the meantime, really struggling. And it got to this point where I seriously considered ending my life. And for me to say that now it kind of makes me feel crazy because, again, it's like I'd gone through all of that stuff not unfazed, but without depression, without ever thinking it was over. And all of a sudden it was these moments where I'd be like, I just can't do this. And again, it came to that point in time. I remember looking down at my daughter and she was almost one at the time and just being so sorry, telling her I'm so sorry because I'd already in my mind made the decision that I was going to end my life. But I felt so guilty. And but I just wanted it out. I just wanted an out. And I just had this moment of clarity of, but she's not going to understand. She's going to grow up with a mother and she's not going to understand that it wasn't her fault. She's not going to understand how much you loved her. She's not going to understand that you didn't leave her because of her, but that because you couldn't deal with it. And it just broke my heart, looking at this little baby who wouldn't sleep ever. Um, and again, in that moment of, I guess, clarity or almost like a miracle, it was like, no, we're going to choose something different. And I'd made that decision. I was like, you're either going to end it and you're just going to get over with it, or you're going to choose to do something different. And in that moment, I chose to do something different. I didn't know what that was because I thought I was doing everything, right? I was looking after myself. I was being social. I was being what I considered to be a good mother or a good wife and a good woman. And all of these social constructs that I thought I should be. But as I dug deeper, I realized that that moment really what changed is that I felt this sense of control. And looking back, it's the similar sense of control that I felt when I was in prison, where all of a sudden I've made a different decision. I felt like, no, I have control. I had no idea what I was going to do. And so I remember just walking around the house and I found a book that a friend had was there. I can't really remember the book. It wasn't that great, but it was more about tips on like decluttering and stuff. And I just remember sitting down with this book and just writing out all these notes of what I could do. Nothing particularly, but it was that sense of I'm now in control and I'm going to do something differently, which really helped me to move on from that. And then I started looking into, the world of personal development and the Tony Robbins and all of this stuff, which really actually led me to where I'm at now and where I realized how much of my identity wasn't really mine and how I was just trying to put on this performance for everyone. And because I kept feeling like I was failing, it made me feel like this sense of I wasn't in control of my life and I was never going to be happy and I was never going to achieve anything. Um, and so that was really my other miracle moment.
And what would you say you have changed on the day to day in prison as well as with your daughter? Um, was there a daily ritual or a daily thing that you did where you really could feel the change after doing it, or no?
There was not one thing that I changed in my day to day. And really, it's not about what you do, because as I said, I was already doing so many things when I was in that depression. I was doing everything I thought I should be doing. I was even doing things I thought I would enjoy. But really, it was about shifting who I was and shifting again that sense of actually, I am in control of my life and having this story of I get to choose. I get to choose who I am. I get to choose how I show up. I get to choose what my life is now going to look like. And even though I didn't have the answers at the time, and even though it wasn't like all of a sudden everything was easy because it's life, just moving now every day with that sense of, even when I do get moments where life is hard, because that's life, right? Especially if you have sick kids and I have a business. And so everything's kind of up and down. But whenever I find myself feeling like, oh, this is going to work, I have that reminder of, but I'm in control of what works. And so it really drives me forwards every day to actually create a life that I do want to lead, which of course has its ups and downs. But I think that for me is the main thing.
I love it. Perfect. And what would you say to people who want to call in more magic and miracles into their lives? How can they make that shift in their mind so that they can really stick with that one?
It sounds simple, but it often isn't. And that is making the choice. And the thing is we choose our stories and our beliefs. We don't think we do because we're often grown up with so many influences from family, from society, and we create all of these stories in our minds about who we are and what we must do. And all of these beliefs we think is set in stone. Like, this is just how life is. This is just how I am. I could never have this or do this or whatever it is. And so we keep reliving the same patterns over and over and over again. But once you become conscious of those stories, then you have a choice to change them. Because typically, and what I help a lot of my clients with is identifying, well, where did you create that story in the first place? And then being able to release a lot of the emotion that's attached to that story and being able to shift what the story is. And you find, well, once you shift the story, everything changes. Because for me, it was, I no longer believe that I'm essentially a victim of my circumstance, that I have no control. Every time I come up with a new story of my what I believe in relationships, I have an opportunity to change it. And it's not always like this, right? Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's just having that awareness so you can start working towards, okay, but what do I want to believe instead? Because whatever you believe, that will be true. If you don't believe in miracles, then miracles won't happen because you won't be looking for them. If you believe miracles happen, you will be looking for them everywhere. It's not actually probably any different than what's really going on in your day to day life. It's just you're more aware of what it is. And so that's where that choice comes in. If you believe you're a really lucky person, you will always find the $5 on the floor. If you believe you're unlucky, you'll find the $5 and you'll go, oh, if only it was 50. This is how our perception and whole mind work. And so, really, it's about you choosing what it is that you want to believe and uncovering why you don't believe those things, why you don't believe things are possible for you in the first place.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And who is Louise today? What does she do?
Louise today is a mum of two very young, sassy girls. We all go, oh, I really want these independent, confident girls, but I just don't want them to be independent and confident when they're with me. You just want them to put their shoes on and get out the door. So I am a mum of two young girls, married, and I have my own business now. So predominantly I support women mostly within their own businesses, but also I have a few clients who are in employment, and it's really about supporting them to let go of a lot of the stories they hold about why they can't do things. And so typically in business, it's when they lack the confidence to actually be really visible and to stand up and be confident to sell. In the workplace, you find that women often don't speak up. Women don't put their hand up for a raise. They don't call things out because they're afraid of the consequences. And so it's really developing confidence within women so that they can go on and actually succeed.
I love that. Beautiful. Amazing. And where can people find you?
You can find me predominantly on Facebook. You'll find me, I'm Louise Kirk. I also have a podcast, Visible and Unstoppable, on Spotify, and louisekirk.com.au is my website.
Amazing. Perfect. And I was also a guest on the podcast. So, guys, listen to the podcast. Go ahead and check it out. And, Louise, thank you so much for your time, for your energy, for your wisdom and your knowledge. And thank you so much for the work that you're doing and for sharing your magic and miracles with us.
Thank you.